Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something that is just incredibly universally relatable, the legendary Indian classroom joke. You know, on the surface, these just seem like simple playground laughs. But if you really look closer, if we actually analyze the back and forth between a frustrated teacher and a perpetually mischievous student, we uncover this absolutely brilliant tapestry. It's packed with linguistic gymnastics, logical subversion, and honestly, a little bit of psychological warfare. So we're going to treat these hilarious anecdotes as a serious data set to understand exactly how humor is used to challenge authority.
Okay, so here's the game plan for This Explainer. We'll start with the classroom archetype, move right into literal interpretation, explore some linguistic wordplay, look at subverting logic, and finally break down the anatomy of classroom wit.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the classroom archetype. Enter Pappu.
So, to really grasp this dynamic, we have to talk about our main recurring character, the absolute legend that is Pappu. Now, Pappu is basically an archetype. He's that innocent but incredibly sharp trickster who is just constantly disrupting the rigid educational system. And our quintessential trickster here relies heavily on a brilliant tactic, literal interpretation. This is when a student takes a totally abstract concept from the teacher and processes it with just absolute, unyielding literalism. The humor here comes entirely from the clash between what the teacher actually meant and the student's hyper-literal reality.
Okay, let's dive into this first example, because it perfectly captures what I'm talking about. So, the teacher announces, "Tomorrow I'm going to give a lecture on the sun, do not miss the class." And Pappu responds, "But I won't be able to come, madam." The teacher asks why, and Pappu says, "The thing is, my mom won't let me go that far." It's just brilliant. The spatial misunderstanding here is the whole joke. The teacher's preposition, a lecture on the sun, is instantly taken as a literal physical field trip to the sun. Pappu completely ignores the fact that traveling to a star is impossible, and instead he grounds his excuse in a totally normal childhood problem, strict parenting.
Now, this same hyper-literal mindset gives us our next amazing scenario, the headstand medical theory. Picture this. The teacher visits a sick Pappu at home, only to find him literally doing a headstand, a Shirshana. The teacher's obviously confused, so Pappu explains his methodology. He says he just took a headache pill, and by standing on his head, he's using gravity to make sure the pill goes straight to his head and doesn't accidentally fall into his stomach. I mean, the science is a bit flawed, sure, but you really have to admire the rigorous, gravity-based logic he's applying to human anatomy here. He identified a problem, pill location, and engineered a completely literal physical solution.
And we see this exact kind of logic pop up in another classic one. A student named Golu has been absent and tells the teacher he had bird flu. The teacher, using basic biology, points out that bird flu happens to birds, not humans. Golu just deadpans, "When did you ever consider me human? You make me a rooster every day." Now for context here, making a student crouch down like a rooster, becoming a murga, is a very classic, old-school physical punishment in India. Golu has literally internalized this punishment. In his mind, if he's forced to be a bird every day, well naturally he's going to catch avian diseases. You can't really argue with it, the logic is impenetrable.
Moving right along to Section 3, linguistic wordplay, the lost in translation effect.
Now, things get really fascinating when Hindi and English collide in the classroom. Take a look at this massive translation gap. A teacher asks the student to say his father's name in English, and the student proudly shouts, "Beautiful red underwear." The teacher is obviously completely baffled and demands the name in Hindi, to which the student replies, "Sundar Lal Chada." Let's break that down because it's hilarious. Sundar means beautiful, Lal means red, and Chada means shorts or underwear. So the student has executed a flawless, word-for-word literal translation of a proper noun. It's 100% linguistically accurate, but contextually it is just an absolute disaster.
We also see these crazy linguistic gymnastics happening with puns inside a single language. In this one, the teacher asks, "Which caste of people make good citizens?" The student confidently says Banya, which is a traditional merchant community in India. When the teacher asks why in the world he'd say that, the student points out that public service announcements everywhere say, "Desh ke ache nagrik banya." Here's the catch. In Hindi, banye is the polite imperative verb for become or be, so the sign literally means be a good citizen. But phonetically, it sounds exactly like the caste name. The student basically weaponized a homophone to answer a complex sociological question.
Sometimes, though, the wordplay projects this incredibly cynical adult humor right onto the innocent student archetype. For instance, the teacher asked for the difference between a ghazal, which is a really romantic, poetic song, and a bhashan, which is a formal speech or a lecture. The student's definition? Every word of another woman is a ghazal, and every word of one's own wife is a bhashan. It completely contrasts the beautifully poetic with the painfully mundane. And let's be real, it's a totally inappropriate thing for a child to say, which is exactly why the subversion works so perfectly as a joke.
So as you can see, language truly is a battlefield in these classrooms. Just consider a scenario where a student innocently asks why we only speak in Hindi or English and not in maths. The teacher immediately fires back with a terrifying sequence of numerical Hindi idioms. She says, "Don't do 3-5, meaning don't be over smart, just be 9-2-1, which means run away. Otherwise I'll give you 5-7, slaps, you'll see 6-36, see stars, and all your 32 teeth will fall out." Naturally, the student immediately agrees that the language of maths is simply too terrifying. The teacher brilliantly shuts down the student's premise by exclusively using numbers to articulate a highly specific physical threat.
Okay, let's jump into Section 4, Subverting Logic and Authority, Redefining the Rules.
In this next batch of examples, the student doesn't just misunderstand the teacher, they actively outsmart them. They take whatever moral lesson is being taught and completely redefine the rules of the world. Here, the teacher is trying to instill some good values by explaining why gambling is a terrible habit. She lays out this very logical cycle for the student. She says, if you gamble, you might win today, but you will lose tomorrow. If you win the day after, you will lose the next day. She's trying to illustrate that loss is inevitable, basically mapping out this whole probability matrix for him to prove her point.
But look at how the student processes that exact same data. He just replies, "I understood, madam. From now on, I will play every alternate day." He entirely subverted the moral of the story. He took her stern warning about the cycle of losing, isolated only the winning days, and turned an ethical lecture into a completely foolproof, mathematically sound gambling strategy. He didn't reject her logic at all. He just weaponized it for his own benefit.
And we see this redefinition of the rules happening across all sorts of subjects. Take Sanju's definition of history. The teacher obviously wants a formal academic answer, but Sanju defines it like this. History is when old people do scandals and die, and we are forced to remember them. I mean, wow. It's remarkably cynical, it's brutally accurate in its own weird way, and it just completely strips away that grand, noble veneer of historical studies. He essentially redefined an entire academic discipline into nothing more than a massive forced inconvenience for students.
Pappu does the exact same thing with the concept of intoxicants. When he's asked what the absolute most intoxicating thing in the world is, he doesn't miss a beat. He says, "A book." Why? Because as soon as I open it, sleep comes. He literally classifies educational material as a narcotic substance, relying purely on the physiological effect it has on his body. And honestly, it's kind of hard to argue with those results.
And finally, we have to look at the modern, technological subversion of authority. You know the oldest question in classroom history, right? Where is your homework? Well, the modern student's response is, "Madam, check Facebook. I have uploaded the screenshots and tagged you." It's incredible. He takes a purely analog power dynamic, the physical act of handing over a notebook, and drags it kicking and screaming into the digital age. He's literally forcing the teacher to interact with him on his own turf, on social media.
And that brings us to Section 5, Anatomy of Classroom Wit, the ultimate takeaway.
You know, when you really look at them, these classroom chronicles are so much more than just quick jokes. They represent this deeply universal human desire we all have to challenge the status quo. The Pappu archetype uses hyperliteralism, crazy wordplay, and sideways logic as a brilliant defense mechanism against a rigid and, let's face it, often boring educational system. It's creative rebellion cleverly disguised as childhood innocence. So I want to leave you with a slightly provocative thought to ponder today. In all of these scenarios, the adult is the one standing at the front of the room holding the chalk, trying to impart traditional knowledge, but through their absurd, unyielding logic, the students are the ones consistently dismantling that knowledge. They force us to look at language, gravity, and even history in entirely new and hilarious ways. So in the end, who is the real teacher in these scenarios? Really makes you wonder how much hidden genius we overlook every single day just in the name of following the rules. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and definitely keep finding the humor in the everyday.